Hello out there, and today I'm going to be doing a long overdue follow-up to three of my favorite knives of 2019 so far. And what we have today are the Spyderco Smock, the Viper Belone, and the Spyderco Ikuchi. And guys, I was taking a look at some of the videos I needed to make, some of the follow-ups, reviews, all those sorts of things that I needed to do, and I realized that I hadn't readdressed some of the high points on any of these three knives, and I figured, well, I really like all three of them. They're three of my favorites of the year. Why not just do them all in one video? And so that's what we're going to do today. I will annotate down below to where I start with the Belone and the Ikuchi, but we're going to begin with the Spyderco Smock. Also, guys, links down below to my initial videos about all three of these knives if you're interested in those as well. But yeah, let's just get into it with the Smock. And this knife, guys, was one that just really appealed to me when it first came out, because anytime Spyderco does something new and different, it piques my interest. And this is a different kind of blade shape for them, not really what you see with a lot of their, typical leaf-shaped kind of stuff. But then also they're working with a new designer in Kevin Smock, and there is a very innovative locking mechanism as well. And so that's what we're going to start with, is the locking mechanism and the button lock. And I know that technically it's not actually a button lock. This is a compression lock that's actuated by a button, but this style of mechanism is one of my favorites. I just really like a good button lock, and the problem that I have with most of them, most traditional ones, or plunge locks I think some people call them, is that they all tend to develop play. Some of them have play out of the box, some of them it takes time, but then there's some up and down that just comes in as time goes on. And I mean, I've noticed this with custom knives. Like really high-end knives with button locks, it just tends to happen. The one exception to that rule that I've noticed so far, and a video on this one coming very soon, is that little ProTech mass drop kind of deal. But again, we'll get back to that in a future video. But with this, what I like about this style of it is that it's not technically a button lock, so you have like the fun kind of fiddle action and maneuverability of a button lock, but you have the strength of the compression lock. And that has not wavered at all, and this knife has been used quite a bit. I've gotten a lot of good time out of it, so no play at all starting to develop. Disassembled this a few times, put it back together, still no issues with lockup at all. And so it really is set apart from the other kind of like traditional button locks that you would see, and for me that means a whole lot. So that's really a good thing. Also, you'll probably notice that I do have a bunch of different colored hardware. All of this hardware is from Blades We Love. I just wanted a little bit of a color pop, and I had purchased the blue ones from my buddy Daddio EDC, and then I figured, well, why not just go the rest of the way and get some bronze colored stuff for some of the other hardware. So it pops, and yeah, that's just aesthetic though, and doesn't really improve the way that it functions at all, but I do like that aspect of it. Moving on to other things about the knife, the other high points, the big thing that you'll always hear about with the Smock is the clip. And as you can see, I have the factory clip on this knife. I have had opportunities to replace it. I have replaced it. Actually, my buddy Steve Kluver sent me a clip to put on this knife. And I'll insert a picture so you can take a look and see what that looked like. I have the clip here, and it doesn't look the way it did anymore because I'm trying to mod it. I removed all the paint because the paint started chipping off of it, and then I tried to heat anodize it. Didn't come out too well. What I am going to end up doing is acid etching this clip. And as far as this clip goes, it fit. You can see how beautifully it would carry with the Smock. But I think I'm going to end up putting it on one of the paramilitary models, because look at how deep that'll carry. So to my buddy Steve Kluver, who, if you're not aware of who he is, a great guy in the community, has shown a lot of support to a lot of really good channels. Really cool of him to send this clip. And yeah, we'll definitely find some use for it. But ultimately, when it comes to the Smock, I really just prefer the regular clip. I like the look of it. It doesn't carry too shallow for me, so it's not that big of a deal. I do wish it was a little bit deeper, but I mean, carrying it just hasn't been an issue, so I just go with the flow, And I do like the pop that the blue versus this like satin finish creates, and yeah, it just looks good to me. So I stick with it. The other really big talking point for me is the jimping and the ergos of the knife, because this whole area is just a little bit of a red flag, you know, with the way that this choil, quote unquote choil, is. And, you know I said in my initial video, you know, it's just an odd shape, and I understand that like that shape has to be put in there in order to house the locking mechanism. I get it, but you know, my question was, could it have been done in a way that would make it usable for you to choke up and actually like use this as a footward choil? And you can do that. And that's really not the big issue. The issue ergonomically is actually the jimping. The jimping, for lack of a better word, it sucks. It's sharp and doesn't grab your thumb very well. I mean, maybe if you're wearing gloves, you probably don't need the jimping, but I mean, it's just not like, I have pretty calloused thumbs, and it's just not comfortable to use. And the good takeaway is that despite this knife is very comfortable to actually cut with. I just avoid the jimping, and I've realized that I do it naturally just when I'm cutting, is, you know, I'll hold a knife like this. I do a lot of like draw cuts with it, and it's really comfortable like this. And I think what I like about the scales, and I have seen a lot of aftermarket scales with this knife too, but what I like about the scales is that there is a decent amount of traction, not like this high traction G10 would have, but there is a decent amount where you can get a good grip and not slide around. And so when I'm moving my hand around, you know, trying to find that like perfect position, it works out with almost no issue. So yeah, the jimping I thought was sort of okay, I think, when I first got the knife, but just after using it, it's just not good. It just doesn't do anything for me. But still, ergos, they do check out overall, just thanks to the scales and just the general lines of the knife. So yeah, had no issues using it. That's really all with the Smock, guys. Again, any questions about any of this stuff, though, just give a yell down below. I'll respond to your questions and your comments. Now let's get into the Viper Belone. The Viper Belone, as far as looks goes, it's probably my favorite knife of 2019. It might be one of my favorite knives, period, in my collection. I mean, it's as far as what I look for in an EDC, it checks so many boxes in that it could be a gents piece, but it's really strong and well built. So it's a good one to actually use. It's not too thick. It's not too, you know, it's just sort of a Goldilocks kind of knife. But it was a Goldilocks kind of knife with just a number of significant drawbacks. So let's just talk about those. The first one I want to talk about is the lock stick and the action. So this knife, titanium frame lock, well, liner lock, I guess. Really just depends on how you look at it. But it locks up really well, but it was very, very hard to disengage this knife. I mean, it did not break in over time. And you can hear when it engages. I mean, it engages pretty loudly. And hold on, let me see if you can hear this. So you can hear when I try to disengage it that it is still, like, there is still a little bit of lock stick. What I did with all these knives, actually, right around the same time, is I disassembled them and I used KPL, the knife pivot lube, and the KPL heavy on the detents. Well, when I put this knife back together, it changed night and day. Like the action on it and the lock stick, so much of that went away, to the extent that I was never able, like, I could not get the leverage and the angle to disengage the lock with my left thumb like this. It wasn't possible. Now I can do it. You know, so a lot of that stuff has improved. It still definitely isn't perfect, and while the knife will, you can see it like starts to free drop, it's still not nearly as smooth as a lot of knives in this price range. You know, it is a little bit of a pricey knife, close to $200. And this is the first Viper that I've ever owned. People have told me that Viper knives are like that they do have lock stick, that they don't have that like kind of free dropping capability very often. And that's fine. I'm really only worried about this particular knife. But if that's not the expectation with Viper, that's, you know, that's another thing. But while this one still is not perfect, it is much improved, and so that's definitely a good development. The one development that has not improved is the pocket clip. I don't think there's really any way to improve this pocket clip, and I don't know if on the just titanium versions without the carbon fiber scale, because there are variations with that, I don't know if it is different or if it will be, any easier. But you can see with this clip, it is very difficult to push the knife into the pocket and to get it out because of this body screw right here. And I touched on it in my review, but yeah, when I slide the knife into my pocket, I'll just do it absent-mindedly, just in the flow of things and walk away, and then realize a minute later that the actual top of my pocket is right here. It didn't push all the way down through because it feels like it's done and stopped, but you're actually just hitting that screw head. And so you really need to actively put this in to the pocket, and then pulling it out can be a little bit difficult as well. I mean, that's for a lot of people, and for myself actually, it is a drawback. It's a negative in a way that for me, I try not to be too nitpicky about clips. I understand when people do care about it a lot. But for me, I just try not to harp on it too much. But this clip is just not good. I mean, once the knife is in the pocket, it's great. It rides really well. It's a deep carry. You can see the clip is showing some wear. But yeah, it just is not the best design for ease in and out of the pocket. And yeah, that's definitely not going to change. One really good thing that has not changed about this knife, even after disassembly, is that right there. So this might not be the most drop shutty knife that you're going to find, but the strength of the opening action is remarkable. And that's, to this day, probably my favorite aspect of the knife, apart from the look of it, is that just because, like I said earlier, I like a knife that can do a lot of things, and this is not a big, beefy, overbuilt kind of knife. It doesn't have it just doesn't have the thick frame and the weight that a lot of heavy users would have, but it opens, like it's a big knife. It opens like you can get some serious shit done. So I really like that about it. And guys, I'll tell you, to be honest, despite the flaws, despite the imperfections, the design of this knife is just so darn good that this is going to be really near the top, and it could be number one. It could be my favorite knife of the year at the end of things. All right, and last but not least, getting into the Spyderco Ikuchi. So the Ikuchi here was, as a lot of you might know, it was one that I was interested in when it came out, but I wasn't going to buy it. I was going to pick this knife up, serve as the middleman, sort of send it along to someone else. But that wasn't the case. That's not what happened, because when I got this knife in hand, I realized I needed to keep it. And this knife has just continued to be a really good EDC, and sort of along the same lines as the Belone. Sort of the same style of carry, like the same kind of use and applications. It's a good gents piece, but a good EDC as well. And the Ikuchi, it was just a surprise for me that I liked it so much, because I didn't think that it would be ergonomic. And the big follow-up is that it's pretty darn good in hand, and it's pretty darn good in use. Again, the same kind of scales as with the Smock, and so I do like the amount of traction and the comfort that I have with these scales. The negative, I guess, is that if you want to use the knife in this position, and I mean, even now, I'm not sweating right now, but just from the oils on my hand and just the lines of the knife, you can just see, if you're trying to push down, you're going to slide. And so just in use, I'm constantly, as I'm cutting, just pulling my thumb back. But to be honest with you guys, what I found is more often than not, when I was cutting with this knife, I was in a looser grip, doing a lot of draw cuts, and I wasn't bearing down all that much. And so that slide didn't become as big of an issue as you might think. When it comes to action with this knife, that's the big talking point that I want to touch on today with this. Is that when it comes to action, I've seen some people have this knife and they were able to break it in and get it to drop shut, with this compression lock. I have not had that luxury at all. And I've disassembled it a couple times. I've polished it, put it all back together, cleaned it, done everything I could, lubricated it, and it just is not that knife. It's not that knife for me. So there isn't a lot of like friction, and it isn't like grimy or anything, but it's just not a knife that's going to free drop for me. Again, that might not be your experience, but it's how it is with me. I really wish that there was a little bit of jimping. Sorry, I'm bouncing around. But it just made me think of the Belone, and I want to get back to the Belone for a quick second. Sorry about that, guys. But I really wish there was a little bit of jimping, because the thing that's great about the Belone when you're using it is that this jimping is so good and perfectly like placed and oriented that you can get great traction and grip from it like this. But also if you're coming down, I mean, my finger is going nowhere just from pushing down like this. So jimping can really help determine, all the different ways that you're able to use the knife. And this, while it wasn't like hindered for anything, I think that if you're going to use a knife long term over the, breaking down boxes for like 15, 20 minutes, this will be just fine. But it's not going to be great for everybody, just depending on how you like to hold your knives. This might not be the best one for you. It might be more of a gent's piece. Sorry, now now that I'm done with the tangent, yeah, getting back to the action, it just didn't break in the way that I've seen others break in for people. So again, mine might just be an outlier. I don't know, but it's not a big deal because I like the way the knife performs and functions as it is. So not really too stressed about it. The one thing, the big thing I still want to follow up on is this hole. I'm used to it, but I still don't like it. And I'm never really going to buy in. Again, I understand the whole idea of having the spider hole, and being able to see it all the time. And I think the reasoning, if I remember correctly, the reasoning for the spider hole in the handle is that the designer wanted you to be able to see the Spyderco trademark hole even when the knife was closed. Well, when it's closed, you don't see the blade, so here's the hole. I don't know. It doesn't really make sense to me, but that's neither really here nor there. I still really like the knife, and if this is the biggest detriment to the knife aesthetically, then we still have a pretty sweet little knife. And taking a look at it in the closed position, I mean, it's just very cool how compact it is. And the last thing here is the smock. So there it is, guys. There's your follow-up. There are a little bit more of a long-term look at some of those big high points. Any questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, let me know down below. I really appreciate you watching. I'll talk with you soon. Thanks again, and take care. Have a good one.